because it was the thoracic cavity from the atlas in Don's system. The odor of this thing was also very strong, that even a large amount of formalin couldn't mask its scent. Sean then asked if this strange body was infected by some kind of other viruses, but Don revealed it could possibly be the body of an aberrant creature that resembles a human. His two friends were surprised when they heard this, but Don paid them no mind and begins touching the skin of the mysterious creature and learns that the skin was very thick. But since they've never seen anything like this before, the students were wondering on how they were going to dissect it. Yet using his knowledge of the atlas, Don was formulating a plan to cut this body open. Suddenly David asked for everybody's attention and announced that they'll only have 2 hours to complete this. Many of the students were complaining about the short timer to dissect this unfamiliar body, but Jake told his group to stop moping and start dissecting like they usually do. Gradually everybody starts to work, but when Robert glances at Don's team, he'd noticed that Don was still doing nothing. David also saw Don's inactivity as well, and hopes that Don doesn't disappoint him. Meanwhile, Jake and his group was having a hard time cutting through the body's skin. They begin sharing ideas on how to solve this problem, and Don was enlightened by their words, so he quickly enters his mind and accepted the hard quest. He then took a scalpel before slicing the skin of the body and explains that the outer layer has nothing but tough cuticles, and the sliced skin proves this theory because it doesn't have any veins or superficial fascia connected to it. Don then requested his friends to remove all of the cortex here so they can see the bones. They obviously agreed to his idea, and the crew began to work on the body. Slowly but surely they were making progress at their own pace. The large screen then broadcast what Don was doing, and most of the other students couldn't believe Don was straight up dismembering the body. A short while later, they have finally found the sternum. Erica was surprised by how thick it looks. Don then asked Sean for a rib plier, and Don tried cutting the ribs with it. However, it proves to be too hard, so Don requested Sean for a bone saw instead. They then start cutting through the ribs on each side, and after a while of this arduous task, they successfully detached all of the ribs from the sternum before Don rips it out from the body. However, they were surprised by the elasticity of the muscles from the sternum being pulled out. Don then took a closer look at the sternum and realized it was covered with nerves and veins. Yet they continue to be shocked when they saw more delicate tissue and organs inside the body, because with bones being tough as armor protecting all the fragile stuff inside the body, Don thinks this creature is born to be a killing machine. Meanwhile, David, who continues to observe Don, was again impressed with the way he's handling the situation. The other students who witnessed Don successfully removing a body part quickly changed their methods to follow his examples. Meanwhile, Don and his friends continue to dive in further. They soon learn of another interesting fact, because this body only has one lung, yet it has 2 air sacs within it. Suddenly Don's head starts to hurt again, and this time he was in a lab with another person. Yet this only lasted momentarily, before Don was back in the real world. Sean then noticed that Don looks pale and asked if he was alright. Don stated that he was fine and wanted to continue. They then continue to dissect the body even further, while learning more about the body parts of the body. And as Don dissected the heart from the body, he starts to feel dizzy again, and once again finds himself in the same illusion where he left off. He'd realized the heart he dissected just now must have triggered this illusion. But when he saw the person sketching the thoracic cavity illustration, Don realized that this person must be the author of the atlas. Yet the author's hand seems to tremble when writing the same sentences he'd rush. Suddenly Don's eyes begins to glow because he look at the writings, and he starts chanting, "They're better than us, they're better than us," which could agree that these aberrant creatures' body was definitely better than humans, and this snapped Don back to reality. Sean then shared that these creatures' body are like genetically modified biochemical soldiers, and Don curiously asked David about their intelligence. Yet David said he will share it with them at another time, before announcing that there was only 15 minutes left. Half an hour later, after the dissection contest was finished, David came in to inform them of their results. East Medical School, Sean, Erica, Don, and Robert have made it through. Meanwhile, from QS Medical School, Jake and John have passed. Finally, from East University of Chinese Medicine, only Daisy Jiang was selected. Now that the results were given, David says he'll be looking forward to seeing the winners again. But Don asked David to wait as he was leaving, because he wanted to continue dissecting the body. David was fine with it and even encourages them to continue, so Jake and John wanted to continue. Don's friend was right behind him all the way, and even Daisy was fired up to join in the action. Don then turns around to say let's do it. Before they got to work like the medical future of this world, the others were working hard, and Don was halfway there till he completed his quest, and as he relentlessly continued to push on forward, Don had completed his mission, but he was now really tired, and told his friends that he'll go get some rest and catch up with them later. Erica was fine with Don leaving, but reminds him to not forget about tonight's dinner party with Professor Gu. Don assures her that he'll be there, before quickly taking his leave. Half an hour later at the gate of East Medical School, Don was dropped off by a staff of the medical contest. While walking through his university, Don was now certain that his parents' disappearance have a lot to do with what is happening now. So he decided to play dumb for now, before he starts investigating once he's accepted by the government. But before that he needs to get rid of 2 important proofs. Don then puts on his medical gloves, before picking up a mouse from the test box, and thanking it for its sacrifice towards medical science. Don then sends the poor mouse to the afterlife with a snap to the tail. He did this towards all his test subjects, before disposing them in a medical waste bag. The second proof was Jerry's phone. Don went back to his dormitory, before taking out a framing hammer and smashing the phone into pieces. After clearing all of the evidences relating to the system, Don decided it was time to accept his reward. The system then presented Don with 3 pages of the diagnosis diary, and Don was surprised he could recognize some of these strange text. He believed that his illusions might have taught him a few words. Don starts muttering some of these words from the pages, and when he read the word perish together, Don realized it was written by someone who was waiting for their desperation. Yet this was all he could figure out from his limited knowledge of the language, and wonders what the author was trying to tell him. Suddenly Don starts to see a pattern relating to how his illusions were triggered. Like how the lab illusion is triggered in the lab, the pool illusion which occurred inside the storage facility, and the author illusion which only materialized after Don had dissected the aberrant creature. Don suspects in order for the illusion to take place, there's a possibility he needs to acquire some knowledge about the contents first. Like how after Don acquired some knowledge about the structure of the aberrant creature, he was able to trigger an illusion after dissecting it. So if pages were to be considered as new knowledge, Don thought of the perfect solution to confirm this pattern. Later at an affiliated hospital of East Medical School, Don masquerades himself as a doctor of the hospital and walks toward the mortuary room. The security guard did notice Don, but he was completely fooled by Don's facade. As Don enters the mortuary room, his heartbeat starts to race rapidly, and this was how he felt every time the illusion is triggered. So Don concluded that his theory was correct, but the headache this time was so unbearable that he screams from the top of his lungs. His vision then began to blur, and Don finds himself standing in front of a chapel down in the area, and he could see many statues that gave off a Lovecraftian-esque vibe, even though some of them were missing a few limbs. But the main thing that captivated his attention the most was the giant chapel that doesn't exist in the real world. Don then entered the chapel and was shocked by what he was witnessing, because there were many people worshipping a mysterious statue like a cult. Don then accidentally touches one of them, and the worshipper head just plop onto the ground, revealing that the worshippers has been dead for a long time now. Don then remembers that this place is a chapel and wonders what kind of deity the people were worshipping. Suddenly Don's head begins to hurt again, and we learn that the pages had reached its limit to allow Don to stay in this illusion, so he was quickly sent back to the real world. The security guard then came and asked if Don was really a doctor from this hospital, but Don quickly made up an excuse before speeding out of here. While making his way out of the hospital, Don wonders if Clayson Tech and his parents were also worshippers of that mysterious cult, but Don then remembered what the man stalking him said. It wasn't Clayson Tech that was responsible for his parents' demise. But as Don exited the hospital, he gets a call from Sean, telling him to quickly come to tonight's dinner party with Professor Gu and the gang. Don then showed a warm smile and said he'll be there as soon as he can. A while later at Sue's restaurant, Professor Gu wanted to make a toast for their unbelievable achievements today, and told them to continue doing their best, because they were now the future of this medical world. Professor Gu then downs a glass and announced that the party begins now. A while later after the party was over, Don tells the other 3 to go first with Professor Gu. Unfortunately, there was no drivers that wants to pick them up around this area, so they decided to walk a bit and try again. 10 minutes later, while walking in silence, Don tried to break the ice and make small talks with Erica by saying that she should take the next cab since it's late and she's a girl. However, Erica looked offended, and Don tried to quickly change the subject. Luckily, a drunken Sean made an unexpected comment, but quickly shuts down again after saying it, and Don tried to explain his friend's unusual behavior when he's drunk. Yet Erica decided to tell him her story. 8 years ago, she ran into a thief while shopping with her grandmother. The thief tried to steal a necklace from Erica's grandmother, but Erica is revealed to be the third generation of a martial arts family, so she quickly stops him while her grandmother falls onto the ground. The thief then took out a knife and swung it at Erica. Erica managed to dodge it without major injuries, before stopping the thief with an ankle to the stomach. Erica then victoriously turned to look at her grandma, but this would be the biggest regret of her life, because her grandmother had passed away while she was distracted with the thief, and this was the moment that pushed Erica into becoming a doctor. Erica apologized if she bored Don with her story, but she wanted to let him know that she's capable of defending herself. Don would then comfort her by making a charming remark, causing Erica to blush hard, and the night ended without any accidents. The next morning, in front of the dormitory's gate, Erica arrives while wearing a neat dress, and Don thought she looked amazing. They were later taken to a building at the outskirts of the city. The students then enter the buildings and met up with the other winners of the contest. David then made his appearance and told everybody that the government will soon review them to see if they're qualified for the job. He then asked Don for a moment of his time, so as the two walked to a quiet place, David advises Don to be as honest as he can for the review, because the government knows more than he thinks, and Don nervously said he understands. Later, at the waiting area near the review room, Erica noticed that Don looks a bit uneasy, so she asked if everything was alright. Don assured her that everything was fine, before a security guard tells Don to come in for his review. As Don made his way inside the review room, he was quickly in the presence of 3 experienced reviewers. Their first question was about Don's parents, and Don revealed he has conducted several investigations at Clayson Tech to no avail after his parents' disappearance. They then wanted to know more about Clayson Tech from him. Don expressed that a man has been recently stalking him, but besides that, he has no further knowledge regarding the company. They then asked why he decided to join the contest after learning he was diagnosed with brainstem glioma. Don took a deep breath, before righteously proclaiming that he wants to be a part of this world full of mysteries. A curious reviewer asked what drove him to do this. Don said when he took a deep dive at the DLK Ocean with Jerry and his folks, he saw something abnormal and now wants to discover the truth behind this accident. The reviewers asked what did Don see. Don revealed there was an undercurrent vortex and the fish were going crazy. But Jerry has recently sent him more proof on his damaged phone, yet it was broken while being mailed to him. The reviewers said they'll send someone to get it from him later, before asking more questions, which Don answered while only twisting some parts of the story. The reviewer then asked him to look at the screen, as a medium-sized TV was slowly ceiling. Dark and gloomy images of different variations were shown without any hints of life from them. Don felt like all of these images were hypnotizing, and the reviewer told that they're gonna ask him some questions, and he's going to focus on the screen while answering yes, no, or not sure. Don nodded that he understands, before they ask him if he thinks there are devils in this world. Don replied yes, and the quiz kept going on for quite some time, before Don starts seeing a memory from his childhood. A young Don tried to enter into his parents' study room, but when he saw the many white papers littered around the room, with all of them being blanked for some reason, Don was taken aback. Suddenly his parents creeped from behind and asked Don to come out, but Don came back to his senses before we learn more of his past. The reviewer then asked if what happened in the past was real, but Don was uncertain and said he was unsure. Finally, the reviewer asked if Don thinks there are superior entities than human, and Don said yes. The reviewer announced the end of the first quiz, but they want Don to continue focusing his attention on the TV. Meanwhile, he needs to make a sentence with a word they give him every 2 seconds, and he's also required to keep drawing on the paper without any pause or interruptions. Don said he understands, and the reviewer began the second test. As the reviewer uttered a few words, Don began writing on the clipboard without any hesitation, and as the second test was done, Don was shocked when he saw what he wrote on the clipboard. because it was the exact same text he chanted in the lab illusion. The fruit of darkness grows from the eternal abyss, and the worms of death live long with the universe. Don began sweating in fear, and he starts seeing more of his memory from the past. His parents was much different than he'd remember them to be, and as he'd noticed the red glow which emitted from the study room, Don felt a dreadful feeling running through every inch of his skin, because those white papers which were originally blank, now had those strange text all over them. The door then slowly shuts itself with a squeaky sound, before it closed with a thump, and for the first time in his life, Don felt like something was wrong with his memories, because he never had any recollection of his parent acting this way until now. But his speculations was cut short when the reviewer asked for the clipboard. Don hands it over, and they were oddly surprised by what Don was asking him if he understands what he has written. Don reveals he once saw this markings in his parents' research room, but never really understood them since his parents never shared anything about their work. Of course, he lied about seeing the marks in his parents' reading room, but for some reason Don felt like this fake memory felt strangely real. The reviewer then discussed with each other for a bit, before concluding that Don's review was now over and he can leave. Don thanks them, but judging from the reaction they gave when they saw his drawing, Don knew for a fact that they know about those strange texts. But as Don came out of the review room, he was again taken by the security guard for a quick interrogation session. The man wanted to know more about what happened when Don was in the submarine, and how Jerry's phone got destroyed. So Don told his story while twisting and turning some events. After quite some time have passed, the man thanks Don for his cooperation, and says it's time for his physical examination. A bit later in the afternoon, most of the students were done with their interviews and health examination, and Sean complained that he received over 100 questions just for his review alone. But Erica was surprised since she received more than 200. So they concluded that the reviews were customized for everyone, and Don confirms it, because he got more than 300 questions. The crew then welcomed him back, before David came in to announce the result of their test. Luckily, everyone passed the test, and they were now officially interns of the medical department of the Mystery Bureau. David added that they'll receive a 30-day exclusive training session at the East Branch headquarters, and a driver will pick them up tonight, so they should hurry up and quickly pack up anything important. He then asked for a moment of Don's time, and said he understands Don's intention of finding the truth by joining the Bureau, but staff at his level doesn't have access to that kind of information, so he should keep a low profile. Don said he'll take it into consideration, and David advised him on one more thing. The review committee gave him a pass because they think he doesn't know much about his parents' career, but getting a promotion from here won't be easy, yet the fair part is he can access more info when he does. So David suggests to keep working hard, before he says his goodbyes. Later that night inside the building, David was holding a meeting with his colleague to talk about the newcomers. David said Robert and John were elites at their school, but at the Mystery Bureau they can only hold ordinary positions at best. Meanwhile, Jake is better and he could be a fine attending physician with some proper training. Daisy, on the other hand, is an amazing girl that could also be something too. And Erica is the second best candidate out of all the newcomers. A colleague then questions about Sean. David said although Sean isn't really that gifted compared to the others, he'll become the essential bond of the team. Now that they've covered 6 of the newcomers, most of their discussion should revolve around Don as the #1 candidate. One of the colleagues was surprised by how highly Don was rated, yet the only one he fell short on was the agreeability category. Although this might be the case, David expressed that Don was still rated highly in the genosis category, which is a characteristic that helps a person have a deeper understanding the world, and it's easier for them to think outside the box. Yet great genosis isn't necessarily appreciated here at the Bureau, because insanity creeps in once you abandon logic and reason. They were also surprised when they learned that Don scored so highly with over 300 hypnotic questions, and David agrees that a normal person would lose their minds. That's why the review committee added a mental disturbance test, but somehow the test turned out fine, so it was better to have him on their side. And David expressed that he's gonna train Don to become MTF reservist, before he moves on to discuss about other topics. Meanwhile, on the road, Don and friends were heading towards the Mystery Bureau. The East medical students were having a fun time joking with each other, but Don was feeling a bit tired, so Erica tells him to take a nap and she'll wake him up once they're there. Don thanks her, and it took a couple of more hours, But Erica later wakes Don up and says that they're here, the East Branch of the Mystery Bureau. The other newcomers had also just arrived, and the receptionist told them to follow him. As Don followed them from behind, he was now one step closer to the hidden truth. The receptionist later briefly introduced the buildings and their functions. Don also didn't feel weird anymore when he saw those soldiers in protective suits, and they also received their intern IDs, which grants them access to certain areas. Also, they are not allowed to leave their dorm after 9 p.m. unless they receive special permission. They later arrive at their dormitory, and Don quickly went to bed in his new room. Don later wakes up the next morning to the sound of cooking and eating, and he learns that Sean have made everybody porridge, enjoys some as well. After the student had their breakfast, they gathered in room 15, and the receptionist later came in to reveal that Robert and John has been assigned to the experiment group, while the rest is in the clinic group. Of course, they've also made special arrangements for Don, but he'll be starting with this group for the first few days. A man then came into the room and introduces himself as William Joe, the instructor of the clinic group. William then began the lesson and told everybody to take out what's in their drawer. The students does as they're told and found a weird glass object. William then began explaining the fundamentals of surgery before asking if they recognized the equipment that they're holding. Don answered it was a model for stanching and ligating practice, and William asked why was that. Don proceeds to calmly answer the question, and William congratulates Don on a wonderful explanation. He then told everyone to come closer so he can showcase how the device. Afterwards, he wanted his students to start practicing it on their own, so while they start practicing with the model, William would give some advice to them when they're doing it wrong, or when a student felt like it's too hard for them, William would encourage them to not give up. He was basically a really nice instructor, and when he went to see how Don was doing, William was surprised by Don's surgical skills. Since Don tied the elastic tube into a triple knot lock with a square knot, Don asked if he made a mistake. Yet William assured Don that he did it perfectly, and he wanted everyone to also get 3 knots, otherwise no lunch for them. He then tells Don to come with him so he could teach him more surgical technique, and Don thought this will be good practice for his calm hands. A while later at the canteen, the students manages to complete their task, and Don told them to try their best in the afternoon since he'll be busy with other subjects. Erica wondered if this was the special arrangement for Don, and Don confirms he'll have to attend other classes besides just the clinic group. Sean then asks if the Mystery Bureau has told him about his future position after they finish their special training. Don expressed that they didn't, but he thinks they'll decide based on the training outcome. However, regardless of where they end up in, their main goal as doctors will always to be fighting illnesses. The group as a whole inspired by Don's word, and Sean hurriedly eats his lunch so he can get back to studying at Don in a romantic way. The days soon pass, and Don was slowly honing his medical skills while taking different classes with other newcomers. Around 15 days later, Don was in his psychiatry class, and he was attentively paying attention to what his instructor was explaining. After the class ended, the psychiatry instructor wanted to have a word with Don. She specified that Don was really gifted, and she hopes that Don could provide some assistance when they're on a field trip. Don accepted the instructor's request, but feels like he keeps getting requested to help in the field trip, like how another instructor wanted his assistance as well. So Don was definitely curious about the position he'll be assigned to. The very next morning in room 15, Sean begs Don to stop practicing his surgical skill on his food, while Erica was impressed by how meticulous Don had stitched the banana. Suddenly the door opens, and William asked if they were up for some.
Everyone, welcome to my channel. If you want to see part 2 of this manhwa, make sure to comment on this video, and also if you want to know the name of this manhwa, you can see here, and also if you want to see more this kind of video, you can see here. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to see more exciting videos. Thank you everyone.